Reading 10 from Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll. Quarami Dugley, December 1st, 1945. Where we live psychologically. Man is defined in the work, first of all, by what he eats and what he breathes and where he lives. Every living animal is defined in the same way, namely, by what it eats, what it breathes, and where it lives. A fish, for example, is different from a man in this respect because a fish lives in the water and breathes in a quite different way from a man and eats different food. The work also teaches that in this great machine of organic life, everything eats everything else. The work, in fact, says that the whole universe is based on the idea of eating and being eaten. Just think for a moment. Can any one of you live without eating something else? Let us take simply organic life itself, namely this sensitive film which surrounds this small planet called the Earth. This sensitive film is fed by the great energy of the sun to begin with, but everything in organic life on this Earth exists only by eating something else. Some of you have heard this idea before, and to which I am not going further tonight. I will return to the opening phrase. Man is defined in this work by what he eats, what he breathes, and where he lives. Now let us take this idea psychologically and not literally. Let me ask you, what do you eat psychologically? What do you breathe psychologically? And where do you live psychologically? Supposing you are very fond of eating negative emotions, supposing you love long, unhappy thoughts, or supposing that you love hearing negative stories, unpleasant rumors about other people. Psychologically, some people eat nothing but unpleasant impressions, unpleasant remarks. They are attracted to unhappy, uneasy situations. They like unpleasant things. They like to talk negatively. This is their food. Again, they breathe in, psychologically speaking, not truth, but false things, lies, unpleasant things. But what I want to speak to you about tonight is where you live. In what part of yourself do you live? In what part of your psychological country do you usually live? Let us once more try to understand what one's psychology means as distinct from the external world of space, for we should continually make this effort. Everyone has a much greater psychological space or country in themselves than they know in the physical sense. They may not have traveled round the world. They may even know only their own little village. And yet, psychologically, they inhabit a particular place, which is exactly correspondent with physical space and physical place. When you have begun to observe yourself, you begin to see that you have psychological space in you as distinct from physical space. You begin to understand what it means that you may be in a very bad place in yourself at any particular moment, just as you might be in a dark, evil street full of robbers, gunmen, and so on, in the external physical sense. It takes a long time for us to understand that we can be in a dangerous and evil place in ourselves, and to realize this requires a great deal of objective strength towards oneself. After a long time, I began to have a more objective relationship to myself, in the sense that I began to realize that at some moment or other I was in a very bad place in myself and surrounded by very bad eyes, in fact, evil eyes. And then I must be very careful how to behave, just exactly as if I were in a very bad slum, surrounded by extremely evil-looking people. What is so extraordinary is that people do not notice that they have a much bigger psychological country that they are living in than the external world that they know. I was speaking the other day to someone about this, and this person said, "I do not understand what you mean by psychological country. Where is it? How do we find it?" It was impossible for me to explain anything further in this particular case because the person to whom I was speaking was extremely externally minded and saw only things outside and nothing inside. That is, the world for him was only what is registered by the senses and not what is registered by self-observation. Now, every devil and angel is already in you in this psychological country to which you gain access through your own self-observation. This enormous country full of cities and deserts and forests, peopled by all these devils and angels, is the country that we have to learn about through self-observation. For we must move about in it as intelligently and carefully as we move about in the external world that we see revealed by our senses. If a man is attacked in some slum, people say, "Why do you go there? Why do you continue to walk down those dangerous streets and meet those dangerous people?" But we are so asleep, so dead to our inner state, so unrecognizant of what the work is teaching us about this inner country in which we are always in a certain place, that we only dimly understand the parallel. After a time, a man in the work begins to know where he is in his own psychological country, amongst what eyes he is, and through the light that comes with self-observation, he begins to know when he must shift his position. Now, the most useful forms of self-remembering are about this inner psychological country of which we gradually become more aware through personal work on ourselves. We learn to remember ourselves in this inner country when, for example, we find ourselves, for one reason or another, in a bad place in it. And so we learn what silence means and what tact to ourselves means. Exactly the same things apply to a psychological place as to a physical place. I mean, it is just as if we are in a pretty tough spot in external space and know quite well we must use silence and tact to escape. The great danger is that we do not realize that we have a continual shifting of position in regard to where we are living psychologically in ourselves, and that, as a consequence, a thing which was harmless yesterday is not necessarily so today. If you do not understand about psychological space, you can understand about different eyes in you. Which eyes are nearest to you at present? What are these eyes like? You could ask yourself exactly the same questions in regard to physical space, could you not? Namely, looking round you, could say, what kind of people am I amongst at this moment? Do I care for them? Do I wish to be with them? When your relationship to your inner life, to your inner psychological space, becomes as vivid and real as is your relationship to external space, to visibly seen things, then you may be quite sure that you begin to understand the meaning of this work. To which eyes in you are you going to consent? And to which eyes are you going to be extremely tactful? And to which eyes are you going to play the part of avoiding them at all costs? When the psalmist said, "We have walked in unpleasant places," I have thought that this defines so well the stage of a man, understanding that he has spent a long time in walking in unpleasant places in his own inner world. So return to this phrase that man is defined by where he lives, taking the whole definition as given at the beginning of this paper. If we take it psychologically and not merely literally, it is a very good question to ask yourself sometimes. Where am I living in myself at this moment? Now suppose you have never worked on yourself for a week. Suppose you have swelled your internal accounts, or suppose you are full of the idea of if only. Now let me ask you, in what kind of a place are you living in your slums? I suppose that a person living in the slums of himself, in the lowest interpretation of everything, must make effort to get out, just as a person actually living in physical slums who has the idea that he might better himself knows quite well that he must make effort to escape from his physical position. It seems to me to be exactly the same thing. Do you know your slums? Do you agree with me that many people live very much in their slums of their psychological country, of their psychological world? Take all the envies and jealousies and poor, mean, negative things that go on in each of us. Do you think they are, in short, slums? I would say from my observation of myself that they are exactly the slums. Everything can be taken in the heaviest, most negative way without the slightest trace of transformation. But this work is about transforming one's life. It is about efforts that lift you above the level in which it is so easy to live all one's life, although one is dressed up outside in the very reverse of slum clothing. Yes, the work begins with the slums. Something valuable is there. Now you will find, if you have reached a certain stage of self-observation, that in the turning wheel of inner experience, you will return again to your slums inevitably, and here at this moment, you have to be most awake and make most inner effort. At another point, you find you do not have to make so much effort because you are not living in a bad place in yourself. But there is always a certain point in the turning wheel of your own psychology where you must be exceptionally careful and most silent, most tactful, and most clever with yourself to get out of this place as best you can without having been robbed of everything. We have all got to realize this turning wheel of our own psychology. I said something above about if only. Now suppose you eat, and let me remind you that man literally is defined as what he eats, what he breathes, and where he is. Let us take this phrase, if only. Is that good food to eat, psychologically speaking? Suppose that I am eating all impressions on the basis of if only. This faded food, this dead, negative food, will not make it possible for me to transform anything in my being. The attitude represented by if only prevents work. But we can always work. We can always go into another part of our psychological country if we observe and separate from some typical, habitual eyes.